You know, when you are up and down with a guy for 60 years, uh, you started this business at 20-year-olds, and you know what it was like back then. Uh, every time I think of voting, I think of John. Well, we first met in 1960 when we were forming what became known as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We thought that we could be much more effective if we started coordinating our activities. And so we met in Atlanta. It's also the weekend that I met Martin Luther King Jr. for the first time. And I tell people that it was that night with King, when I spent 4 or 5 hours with him, I came out of the room a changed person. So I had my Saul of Paul transformation that weekend. I've often said about John, he became a real disciple of Martin Luther King Jr. A lot of us adopted nonviolence as a tactic. John internalized nonviolence. It became his life.
I said on many occasions that the vote is the most powerful nonviolent instrument of transformation we have in our democracy, we have in a democratic society.
And so, of course, it was 1965 when they marched across the Emmett Pettus Bridge, and that led to the '65 Voting Rights Act. So what John was doing, and many of us throughout the South, was using that new Voting Rights Act to get African Americans registered to vote. John kept faith. He, more than anybody I knew, really believed that we were going to succeed. And that's why I want to do whatever I can to carry out his work. Because he spent the last 7 years of his life working on getting the Voting Rights Act reinstated. Supreme Court gutted it 7 years ago in the Shelby case.
People had to pass a so-called literacy test. Interpret certain section of the Constitution. One man was asked to count the number of bubbles in a bar of soap. Another man was asked to count the number of jelly beans on a jar. It's shameful that you would come here tonight and say to the Department of Justice that you must not use 1 penny, 1 cent, 1 dime, $1 to carry out the mandate of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. We should be opening up the political process and letting all of our citizens come in and participate. People dying for the right to vote. Friends of mine, colleagues of mine.
John wanted to get that bill passed real bad. We'll pass it in the House, and it's sitting over in the Senate. Hopefully the Senate will do more than give lip service to John Lewis, and by their deeds, pass the bill and send it to the president. If you're asking me whether or not I think we're going to get a majority of the Senate to agree to it, I'm not optimistic about that. But what I am optimistic about is that we can explain to the American people why we need a new Senate. If that law were to pass now, and we could operate under that law going into this election, a couple of things they could not do that they're doing now. In my home state of South Carolina, they started a policy, if you want in an absentee ballot, you got to submit an application with their Social Security number. We ask people to protect their Social Security numbers. Why are we going to require that? And that's what the state of South Carolina finally settled our lawsuit. Photo ID laws. These things you outlaw with the Voting Rights Act. And most egregious is that you have states now that are sending out applications for absentee votes or early votes, and you got to buy a stamp to mail it back in. That's a poll tax that's been outlawed. So these are the kinds of shenanigans that they would not be able to do if we had the safety of that Voting Rights Act, no matter what the movement is. there will be somebody that stands head and shoulders above all others. There were 600 people on that bridge that day. Some of them I knew very well, pretty popular people, some more popular than John. But John stood head and shoulders above all the others. And no, I will never forget John Lewis. I will never get him out of my system.